Good evening, Shapers. Welcome to another segment of the Engaged Culture Podcast. I'm so thankful for every one of you for tuning in every week for this incredible opportunity to minister, to think, to pray about situations happening around all of us, all around the world. Today, I want to look at COVID-19 and its economic implications to every one of us. So, when COVID-19 hit us in the year 2020, it presented governments with a complex problem and a complex balancing act between what to do concerning saving lives without destroying livelihoods. And one of the key components of economics, anybody who studies economics, one of the key concepts you're going to learn is a concept called opportunity cost. And it's a term that refers to the value of what you gain based on a decision compared to what you lose based on that decision. Um, in a nutshell, it's trying to measure the value of the road not taken. When you've had two options, you're trying to measure, okay, I've taken this option, yes, but in taking this option, I've lost another option. And what is the value of that option I've lost as compared to the value of the option I have taken? Opportunity cost is the cost of making one decision over another. And that cost can come in terms of money, in terms of resources, and in terms of various other things. Simply because every decision that you make has an opportunity cost. When you choose option A and lose option B, you're trying to measure, when it comes to opportunity cost, what have I, in making this decision to take option A, what have I lost in terms of rejecting option B? For example, if option A was I'm going to work for Google as opposed to option B, Facebook, what have I gained compared to what I have lost? So, for example, let's say working for Google for 1 year, you're going to earn 1 million rand. But at the same time, let's say if you had chosen Facebook and you were going to gain, let's say you're going to gain 1.5 million from working from Facebook, that means the opportunity cost is 500,000 Rand, in that in choosing Google, you've actually lost 500 million from Facebook. Every cost, every decision we make has a cost. There's an opportunity cost in every decision that we make. So when we look at the Bible, for example, a good example we can use is Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was preparing that soup and Esau came back from hunting, didn't manage to capture anything, and he was hungry, he was now faced with a decision. And his brother told him, okay, I'm only going to give you this meal if you give me your birthright. So when he chose to have that soup, he had lost his birthright. What a loss. You know, every decision you make has an opportunity cost. So all economics then is a study of opportunity cost or trade-offs. And a trade-off, simply defined, is any situation where making one choice causes you to lose or forego the benefit or the opportunity of something else. So when governments were in this situation in the pandemic, when they were now in a situation where they had to decide, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to be looking at lives and livelihoods. And their choice to have lockdowns was a choice which had significant opportunity cost, in that they may have saved lives, but they had lost many livelihoods. A lot of livelihoods have been affected by coronavirus. And one of the things I've noted just in terms of social media, when I look at social media makes high level leadership decisions seem so easy. And this is because on social media, our opinions or the decisions we make on social media do not affect lives and livelihoods on the same scale as a government or as governmental leaders. And when I look at all the nations of the world today, every nation has struggled with COVID-19. Every nation has struggled in terms of what are the best decisions we can make for our people so that we save lives and save livelihoods. And one of the realities that we have right now is that every government right now have frustrated citizens because This was a problem with no perfect answer. And the difficulty with this question of lives versus livelihoods is this. Let's say, for example, um, as a government, you made a decision to make lockdowns which actually saved someone's life. And that person who stayed at home, while they were at home, they lost their business, they lost their job. And even though their life was saved on another level because they lost their livelihood, their life was destroyed. So you've actually saved and destroyed a life at the same time. So this is one of the most difficult challenges that all leaders are facing in the world today: saving lives versus saving livelihoods. So it's a really tough question, and today we want to look at this. We want to look particularly at the livelihood side, how lockdowns and COVID-19 have impacted us economically. And the reason why we must do this study is in First Chronicles 12:32. It says, "From the tribe of Issachar, there were 200 leaders of the tribe. All these men understood the signs of the times and knew the best course for Israel to take." We must be able as a church to read what's happening around us in the world and be able to give our people the right course of action to take in light of this global pandemic. So, coming into the year 2020, South Africa as an economy was in a season of decline. You know, from our peaks, which were around 2006, we had a GDP growth of about 5.6%. And coming out of that and coming into the year 2020, our GDP was in the 1% region, just either slightly above or slightly below. And then when COVID-19 hit in 2020, our GDP fell to minus 6.96 growth in the pandemic due to COVID-19 and the policies that we implemented to combat COVID-19. And there have been some industries and businesses that have been extremely hit hard by this pandemic. And any industry that is involved that needs to gather people has been negatively impacted, from events to conferences to airlines to hotels to restaurants to commercial properties. Many people have lost their jobs, and many people have lost their businesses, and many people have lost their livelihoods. And I don't think that the people who've lost their livelihoods in this pandemic are getting an adequate voice. There's no one really speaking on their behalf in terms of what they have been through and how they are struggling to survive in the middle of this pandemic. And an interesting industry which has been hit very hard by this pandemic has got to be the movie industry. When you look at what's happening in Hollywood, for example, there was a time coming into 2020 where movies would make $1 billion, but I think that season has passed. I don't think we're going to be able to see the movie industry, particularly movie theaters, that model, that business model of releasing a movie in a movie theater, developing the kind of revenue, $1 billion movies. I think that might be a thing of the past, and some of the factors, and there's many factors for that. One of them is better home setups. A lot of people at home have incredible, have huge screen TVs or projectors, or another thing is also streaming. A lot of people now through COVID-19 are more accustomed to watching things like Netflix. They're more accustomed to home entertainment. Another thing which is also going to mess up Hollywood in the years to come is there's just too much content. For example, in the superhero genre, there's just too much content and there's too much choice. So we're spoiled for choice. And also another factor is not going to the movies has actually changed us. You know, just that admin of going to a movie house, no one really has that patience anymore to go and stand in line, get a movie ticket and sit in a movie. Yet you can go through all that admin and just watch at home without going through that admin. At the same time, there are also industries and companies that have prospered in the middle of this pandemic. There are many companies like Amazon, Zoom, Uber Eats, DoorDash, Takealot, Netflix, Disney Plus, various companies have actually prospered in the middle of the pandemic. And when you look at all those companies I've named, they all have one thing in common. They are all digital. They are digital companies. Companies in the digital space. Most companies in the digital space have prospered and increased and been able to amass a lot of wealth in the middle of this pandemic. And which indicates to us then, as sons of Issachar, that the future of business is digital. And as children of God, we've got to start thinking about the digital space and how to, if I'm going to use our Christian language, how are we going to take the digital mountain over? And how are we going to get plugged into the digital space in order to succeed? So I want to just look at the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, in terms of how they dwelt with a season of famine. Because if we're going to draw a parallel between what we are going through as as a type of economic famine, because a lot of businesses cannot function on an optimum level in light of this pandemic, I think we can draw some ideas and some principles from the patriarchs in terms of how they dealt with the famine as a type of pandemic. The first patriarch is Abraham. And when there was a famine in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, Abraham's response was to migrate. And there are some famines which require you to migrate. And sometimes in the middle of a famine, one of the options, one of the solutions is actually migration. So maybe in this pandemic season, you need to start thinking and praying about migrating from one industry to another industry, or from one skill set to another skill set. For example, back in the 60s when there were typewriters, actually being a typist was actually a profession. But now with the emergence of PCs and laptops, that profession is not in demand anymore. So you had to move your skill set from being that of a typist into another type of skill set. And sometimes even in a famine, you need to be prayerful that maybe I need to migrate from one city to another city, and in some cases from one nation to another nation. So in the middle of this pandemic, one of the things you need to be praying about is, Lord, should I migrate? Should I move from this industry to another industry? Should I move from this skill set to another skill set, from this city to another city, or from this nation to another nation? The next patriarch who dealt with a famine has got to be Isaac. And his solution in the famine was to sow. Now, one of the things for us in this, there's a word of faith offering nugget interpretation of what Isaac did in the famine. When we say that Isaac sowed in a famine, some people interpret that as when times are hard, that's when you need to give offerings like you've never given before. But in the text, when you look at the text literally, Isaac didn't literally in the famine say, okay, there's a famine in the land, I need to find a church where I can just start giving money, and through giving money I'm going to reap 100-fold. The real meaning of what happened in Isaac's time is, in the famine, he was in agriculture, so it was actually an agricultural term. He still sowed seed in his field in the middle of the famine, and he reaped 100-fold in the middle of the drought. And the question becomes, how did that happen? So there can be two possibilities. The first one is that he experienced a miracle. That in the case of Abraham, Abraham had to migrate, but Isaac remained where he was, and God blessed him in the middle of a famine where he was. And God probably did a miracle where, after Isaac sowed seed in the ground, God watered the field which he had sowed seed in. But another interpretation can be based also on Genesis 26, when we see that one of Isaac's major skills, Isaac was a well digger. He was someone who had the skill of digging wells. In other words, he could find water underground. And because in a famine affects people who rely on above surface water. But Isaac had a skill where he could find water under the ground. He was a well digger. So in this pandemic, maybe what you need to be praying for is, Lord, make me a well digger. Show me how to find underground streams of water so that I'm still able to prosper even though there is no rainfall, even though we're in a drought. Show me the underground streams. There are underground streams in every city. There are underground streams of income in every nation. And you just need to pray about it, think about it, and dig some wells. When there isn't rain, maybe it's time for you to dig wells. Because because Abraham migrated, but in the case of Isaac, he remained where he was. He remained in his industry. He remained in his skill. He remained in his city. He remained in his nation. And he was able to find the underground water. I pray that God gives you the anointing of a well digger so that you're able to find the underground streams that can prosper you in the middle of a pandemic. The next patriarch we want to look at in this, who experienced famine, has got to be Jacob. Now, when there was a famine in Jacob's time, Jacob didn't migrate. Jacob didn't dig wells. Instead, he sent his sons with money to Egypt to buy grain. So, in other words, Jacob bought grain in the middle of a famine. So he embodies the scripture which says money is a defense. He didn't need to migrate. He didn't need to sow or to dig wells. All Jacob had to do was just sign a check and the food was available. And that's another level because he had stockpiled a lot of cash that was able to carry him through the crisis. And one of the things most financial planners would tell you to do is to always have an emergency fund, always be able to have funds which can finance all your expenses for a 3 to 6 month period. That you've got to have savings that can cover your expenses, your monthly expenses over a 3 to 6 month period. But one of the measures of wealth then is how long can you live without having to work for an income. And if what you are doing today is stopped, can you still live on the same level just based on your assets without going solvent? And we need to shift our mind and shift our thinking to understand that what assets am I building so that I don't need to work to earn a living? What assets am I building so that I'm in a situation where I am able to retire and live comfortably regardless of the economic environment? And then finally, the last patriarch we want to look at in terms of how he managed the famine has got to be Joseph. Now, Joseph is a multi-level. I think the Joseph level of dealing with famine is the highest level. He developed a business model which kept the world alive at the same time generated profits in the middle of a famine. He did something which for me makes me a bit critical of the prophets of doom. There's a lot of these prophets of doom out there, and in particular, who claim to have seen the COVID-19 pandemic coming. I mean, after COVID hit, all types of videos started to surface of prophets prophesying, vaguely prophesying of a global crisis. Now there's prophets who every day all they do is prophesy doom, this and this is going to happen. And after this thing hit, there were a lot of prominent prophets who started to bring out videos which they were dating, saying that we saw COVID coming and we spoke about it. And so my questions with that is, if someone really saw what was coming in 2020, they would make that one prophecy their weekly cry. They would make that one, if you really saw the devastation which COVID-19 was going to bring, you were going to change your entire ministry to simply focus on this crisis, because this is the biggest crisis we have faced in our generation. And part of that is when you're constantly just prophesying a whole bunch of prophecies all the time and prophesying doom all the time, you don't know which one you need to sit on in prayer. And you don't, because you've thrown out so many, you don't know which one needs your prayerful attention. And let's say you did see COVID-19 coming. My question now becomes, which systems did you put in place to save lives and save livelihoods before this thing happened? Because when Joseph saw the famine, when Joseph saw that this famine is coming, he didn't just sit back and say, wow, I'm so gifted at seeing doom. I'm so powerful. I'm the most powerful prophet who can predict problems. He came up with systems and structures that were going to save lives and save livelihoods. His system was, in the years before this famine comes, let's prepare, let's save, let's prepare, let's put reserves in place so that when this thing hits, people around us are not going to die, but the people around us are going to prosper. So we need to be this is, I think Joseph is the highest level of how to deal with the pandemic, in that he was able to save lives and save livelihoods and actually profit in the middle of a pandemic. So I pray that in this famine that we're going through, I pray that God preserves you. I pray that in this famine, particularly for those who've lost livelihoods, for those whose businesses have crashed, for those whose churches have closed down, for those who've lost everything in the middle of this pandemic, particularly those who've lost livelihoods, I pray that the wisdom of God comes upon you and that you begin to prayerfully think and look at these 4 different models of how to deal with the famine. In the case of Abraham, he used a migration model. He migrated in the famine. He moved from one industry to another, or moved from one city to another, or moved from one skill or get a new skill that is able to generate income, or move from one nation to another. Or you're going to take the Isaac model, where he sowed or he invested in the middle of a famine. He dug wells in the middle of a famine. Or you're going to use the Jacob model, where Jacob had stockpiled enough. He had an emergency fund that was in place to deal with the famine. And maybe after this famine, one of the things you really need to pray about and look at is how to develop an emergency fund for emergencies. At the same time, how to stack up assets so that in the event that you lose your job or you lose your business, you're still able to sustain yourself without that regular income. And then thirdly, there's the Joseph model, where he was able to sell in the middle of a pandemic. He had a system that was able to be productive in the middle of a hard place. I pray that God keeps you. I pray that the Lord blesses you in the middle of this pandemic, that whatever you're dealing with financially, I pray that the grace of God finds you where you are and gives you wisdom so that you can begin to take action, you can turn it around, and you can go to another level, and you can prosper in the middle of a pandemic, and you can prosper post-pandemic and prepare for the next crisis. Because as long as we're on earth, there's going to be other crises. When we come out of this one, there's going to be another one. And in fact, right now, the new one is, there's always a new variant. There's the Delta variant. There's the Omega variant. There's all types of variants which are going to keep coming. But I pray that God gives you the wisdom of how to navigate through this and how this thing will not destroy you, so that you can end up on a higher level and that you can prosper and succeed in the middle of this. May God bless you. Have a blessed week.